Alice Sebold is the author of the novels The Almost Moon and The Lovely Bones. She has also written her own autobiography entitled Lucky. Initially, in reading her two novels, the reader can see how Sebold uses distinctive writing techniques to create sympathy towards different characters. Once I read her autobiography Lucky, it helped me understand her motives for writing about such dark topics and the parallels between her own life experiences and her novel content. Alice Sebold uses various writing techniques to establish sympathy for Helen Knightley in The Almost Moon and Susie Salmon in The Lovely Bones. She uses flashbacks, narrative structure, and characterization to achieve this. Flashbacks allow you to see deeper into the lives of Sebold's characters. You can get a feel for what they have been through, which allows you to develop sympathy for Helen and Susie. In The Almost Moon, Helen has a glimpse of when her father comes home from being gone for some time, and she thinks to herself, "It was my mother who had the problems, my mother who was afraid, so afraid that nothing could make her unafraid. She felt safer in my father's arms." This flashback demonstrates that Helen was growing up with an unstable mother and a father that wasn't around very often. Once you understand her upbringing, you can start to build feelings of sympathy for her. In The Lovely Bones, Susie looks back on a happy childhood memory when her grandmother took her and her sister out shopping. On rare occasions that she visited near the start of the school year, she would take the two of us out. We marveled at her as we watched her nimble fingers play the hangers like so many keys. Suddenly, hesitating only for a moment, she would pull out a dress or shirt and hold it up to us. "What do you think?" she'd ask. It was always perfect. This memory shows that she was taken from a stable, loving family. This makes the reader more sympathetic to Susie and all that she has lost. Narrative structure is key to developing sympathy for Helen and Susie. Both novels are written in first person, which enables the readers to connect and commiserate with that character. Helen, who murdered her mother, narrated The Almost Moon. Therefore, she was able to let the reader see all of the details of her life and could present valid reasons for her actions. This caused the reader to actually sympathize with the murder. In The Lovely Bones, Susie, the victim of rape and murder, was the narrator. The reader could easily sympathize with Susie because they were given a complete picture of her life and the tragedy that surrounded her.
Alice Sebold's novel, The Lovely Bones, is one of those books that you don't quite know what to expect, but when you read it, you get it very quickly. It affects you emotionally as a reader, and as a filmmaker, that's terrifically interesting.
And cut! Right, great, good, that was great.
The Lovely Bones is a story set in the suburbs of Philadelphia in the early 70s. It's about the Salmon family, husband, wife, 3 children, and a tragedy befalls them.
Bye, Dad.
Bye, Susie. Oh, hey, you're the salmon girl, right?
They really were in the prime of their lives. Next thing you know, the police arrived and nobody really knows what happened to her.
We didn't find her, Mrs. Salmon. I'm very sorry.
It's a very compassionate story. The way it's told from the girl's point of view and the innocence that she has and the way she looks at the world she's left behind.
Susie is on this incredible adventure into the world of the afterlife. The rules of our world no longer apply. She has to come to terms with where she is, and she has to somehow influence events back down on Earth that enable her killer to be caught.
Sebold uses characterization to her advantage in enabling you to understand Helen and Susie's character and make you want to feel sympathetic towards them despite the circumstances. Helen is portrayed as a troubled character left with the burden of caring for her mother even when her mother never really cared for her as a child. This results in her resenting her mother and leaves the reader sympathizing with her. Helen demonstrates the trauma that her childhood caused her when she thinks to herself, "I would cut the white fat off a slippery chicken breast and spread the flesh out flat on the broiler pan, only to imagine holding my mother's heart." This shows she is damaged and unable to think clearly, which makes her actions more understandable. Susie is portrayed as a kind, sweet, innocent, average teenager. It is her kind heart that got her into the situation with her murderer. Even though her life was taken from her so cruelly and early, the character doesn't become bitter. At the end of the novel, she states, "I wish you all a long and happy life." This characterization of Susie makes her seem even more sweet and vulnerable, which adds to the reader's ability to sympathize with her. After reading Alice Sebold's autobiography, it helped me get a better understanding about why she wrote about violent acts in both of her novels, and why she was compelled to, in The Almost Moon, drive sympathy for the murderer. Sebold grew up in a dysfunctional family. Her father was absent for extended periods for work, and she was left in the care of her mother, who struggled raising her and her sister because of her own emotional problems. Her mother suffered from anxiety, so often her own needs had to come before Alice's. This parallels primarily with The Almost Moon, in which Helen's mother suffered from agoraphobia, which is an anxiety disorder characterized by irrational fear of not being able to control your surroundings. Then later on, her mother developed dementia. Also in The Lovely Bones, Susie's mother was portrayed as unstable. She left her family at a time when they needed her most, with coping with Susie's death. When Sebold was in college, she was brutally raped and beaten, which completely traumatized her. In order for her to cope with this, she had to seek justice and do everything she could to identify her attacker and put him behind bars, which she eventually achieved. This paralleled with The Lovely Bones, in which Susie was raped and murdered, but even in her afterlife she was compelled to seek justice. She tried to guide her family to identify her murderer, but in the end she achieved the ultimate justice herself by taking Mr. Harvey's life by willing the icicle to fall on him. There are messages within both of her novels which are a reflection of her own life experiences. She is trying to bring awareness of the following. Alice Sebold was able to use her own gift as a writer to help her cope with the traumatic events of her own life. She was also able to create a sense of satisfaction through shaping which characters received the sympathy. Sebold also sends messages to the readers in the hopes that those that deserve understanding and sympathy will receive it.